I never thought my life would take such a cruel turn. One day, I was just a mother, proud and grateful, living a quiet, simple life. My days were filled with routine, morning coffee on the porch, tending to my little garden, and waiting for the phone calls that once came often from my son. I believed family was forever. I believed love couldn't be broken, but I was wrong. When my son married, I thought I had gained a daughter. Instead, I gained silence. Silence that stretched into years. My daughter-in-law didn't just dislike me, she turned my own child against me. I watched as he drifted further away, until the calls stopped, the visits ended, and I was left completely alone. 15 years. 15 birthdays with no candle, no hug. 15 Christmases with an empty chair at the table. 15 years of being erased by the very people I once held closest to my heart. But here's what they never expected. That in those 15 years of silence, I was building something. Something that would change my life forever. This isn't just a story of betrayal. This is the story of how I rose from abandonment to power, and how the day they came crawling back, I finally gave them the answer they never saw coming. I remember the day my son first introduced me to her like it was yesterday. He came home with that excited, nervous grin on his face, the kind of grin that lights up a room. I could see the sparkle in his eyes, the hope that he had finally found someone special, someone who would make him happy. And at first glance, she seemed perfect, sweet, charming, polite. I thought, this is it. This is the girl my son has been waiting for. She shook my hand delicately, with that carefully rehearsed smile, and called me Mom. I'll admit I felt a warm rush of happiness, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of a wonderful chapter for all of us. For a while, it was wonderful. Family dinners were cheerful. There were laughter-filled conversations, shared recipes, and little gestures that made me think she truly cared about me. I dared to hope that my relationship with my son could survive marriage, maybe even grow stronger with a new family member in our lives. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. The small comments started creeping in, barely noticeable at family dinners. Things like, "Oh, Mom, maybe you shouldn't interfere with how we do things," or, "I don't think he really needs your advice anymore." At first, I brushed them off. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe it was just the adjustment period. A new wife, a new household dynamic. But then the whispers started. Little comments when we were alone. And more often than not, when my son was around. Things designed to make me doubt myself. Things designed to make my son doubt me. "You know, Mom really doesn't understand how the world works anymore," she said once while stirring her coffee, her eyes fixed on me but her tone casual, almost friendly. I tried to smile through it, pretending it didn't hurt. But it did. Every word felt like a tiny cut. Over the next few months, I began to notice how different my son was. The man I had known my entire life, the boy I had held in my arms as a baby, the teenager I had cheered for at every graduation and football game, he was changing. He no longer shared little details about his life. He stopped inviting me to family dinners, even when I lived only a few blocks away. Phone calls that once lasted an hour were reduced to brief, awkward hellos. And at first, I told myself it wasn't personal. "They're just busy," I said. "Marriage changes things. This is normal." But deep down, I felt the distance growing like a slow, suffocating fog. It wasn't just physical distance anymore. It was emotional. And then came the invitations, or rather the lack of them. Holidays, birthdays, special occasions. I wasn't invited. I would hear through the grapevine about gatherings I had once attended without fail. And every time, it cut me to the bone. I would ask myself, why am I no longer welcome? Family gatherings became a minefield. I tried to act normal, to smile, to pretend nothing had changed, but I could feel her eyes on me. Critical, calculating, judging every word I spoke, every movement I made. Conversations became stilted. Laughter faded into awkward silences. Even my son seemed unsure how to act around me. It was as if he had been told, silently, to keep me at a distance. The first time it became crystal clear was a quiet afternoon at their home. I had stopped by unannounced, thinking he would be glad to see me. He answered the door, smiled politely, and invited me in. But the moment she entered the room, I could feel the shift. Her smile was tight, her voice a little too saccharine. She directed the conversation, subtly putting me in the background. My son seemed to shrink into himself, nodding along, laughing at things I didn't understand, agreeing with things he never used to agree with. It was a painful déjà vu of a life I had lost. Then came the day that broke me completely. A normal evening. Or so I thought. I called my son to catch up, to ask about his day. There was hesitation in his voice, a hesitation I had never heard before. And then, finally, the words I had been dreading for months. "Mom, we need to talk. I don't think it's healthy for us to keep in touch. It's better if we don't see each other for a while." I was stunned. My hands shook as I clutched the phone. My son, my only child, was telling me that I was no longer part of his life. I remember sitting down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, unable to breathe properly. My heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest. 15 years of love, of nurturing, of sleepless nights and school plays, all erased in one simple statement. "We don't need you anymore." I tried to reason, to argue, to plead. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What did I do wrong? I raised you. I loved you. I gave everything I had." There was silence on the other end, and then her voice, soft, persuasive, almost apologetic, but deadly all the same. "Mom, it's for the best. Things are complicated. Just give us space." I couldn't believe it. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him to remember who I was, to remind him of the bond we had shared since the day he was born. But I couldn't. There was a finality in his tone, a steel edge I had never heard before, and in that moment, I realized something that would haunt me for years. My son had been turned against me. My daughter-in-law had succeeded. The heartbreak was unbearable. I walked around the house like a ghost, the emptiness of my own home matching the emptiness inside me. I went through my old photo albums, flipping through pictures of birthday parties, graduations, family vacations, snapshots of a life that no longer existed. And with every picture, every memory, the pain deepened. I could almost hear him laughing, hear him calling me Mom, feel the warmth of his hand in mine, and then the cruel reminder that those moments were gone. For months, I felt lost. I tried reaching out, sending letters, messages, emails, all ignored. Every attempt at connection was met with silence. I watched as my son, the boy I had raised, built a life without me, guided subtly by her influence. I realized that the person I loved most in the world had been reshaped into someone unrecognizable, someone I could no longer reach. It wasn't just my son I mourned. It was the family I had dreamed of, the holidays, the celebrations, the everyday moments that seemed small but were everything. It was a slow, crushing realization that for the first time in my life, I had been completely shut out of someone I loved more than anything. And all of it, I knew, was orchestrated. Every whisper, every seed of doubt, every moment designed to make me disappear. And yet, amidst that crushing pain, a small, quiet ember of resolve began to glow. Because I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. They may have taken my son from me, and they may have tried to erase me from their lives, but they had underestimated something. They had underestimated the strength of a mother's heart. And though I didn't know it then, that ember would grow, and it would carry me towards something they would never see coming. I sat there in that quiet house, the walls echoing memories of laughter that was no longer there, And I made a silent promise. I will survive, I will thrive, and one day they will see me not as the woman they pushed aside, but as someone who cannot be ignored. This chapter sets up the initial trust and hope when she first met the daughter-in-law, the gradual manipulation and alienation by the daughter-in-law, the heartbreaking moment of being cut off, the emotional depth of losing her only child, foreshadowing her eventual comeback. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and before I knew it, the months had stretched into years. 15 years. 15 years of living in the quiet shadow of my own home, of walking through my days with a hollow ache that never seemed to fade. The silence was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of their voices, it was the absence of connection, the absence of shared life. Holidays became a time of dread rather than joy. I would watch Christmas lights flicker on other homes as I sat alone, sipping tea, knowing that my son and his family were celebrating without me. My birthday came and went year after year without a single phone call, without a single, "I love you, Mom." Milestones passed, graduations, promotions, anniversaries, even little everyday victories I had once shared with him. And I witnessed them from the sidelines, invisible, erased. Neighbors would stop by occasionally, small talk and casual smiles. "How's your son?" they'd ask. "Have you heard from your family?" And I would smile politely, the smile that said, "Everything's fine. Everything's normal." Inside, my heart was screaming, a storm of grief and longing that no one could see. I had learned early on that showing pain would only open the floodgates for awkward questions, for pity, for the endless whispers of, "I'm so sorry, that must be hard." I didn't want pity. I wanted my life back. Friends would try to include me in their celebrations, inviting me to Thanksgiving dinners or birthday parties. And while I appreciated the gesture, I always felt the invisible weight of absence pressing down. I would join their tables, laughter around me, but inside, a quiet voice would whisper, "You're still missing the one who matters most." I learned to nod, to laugh along, to hide the hollow ache behind practiced expressions. It became an art, hiding sorrow behind a mask of normalcy. And yet, at night, when the house fell silent, the mask would slip. I remember the nights vividly, the way the moonlight would spill across the living room floor, the way shadows seemed to echo my loneliness. I would sit in my favorite chair, sometimes holding a cup of tea, sometimes just staring at the wall, and let the tears come. Silent sobs that nobody would hear. Tears for the birthdays missed, for the holidays spent in solitude, for the conversations I would never have, the hugs I would never feel. I cried for the mother-son bond that had been broken, for the life that I had once envisioned but had been stolen. Sometimes I would whisper into the darkness, calling his name softly, hoping that somehow the sound of my voice might reach him. But the emptiness answered back. It was a hollow, echoing silence that wrapped around me like a cold blanket. The house was too big, the walls too quiet. The photographs of him as a boy stared down at me from the shelves, frozen smiles that reminded me of what I had lost. And yet, in the midst of that grief, I made a conscious choice, a stubborn, unyielding decision, to refuse to completely give up on myself. I began to focus on the things I could control. I tended to my garden, watering each plant with a care that mirrored the love I still carried inside me. I cooked meals for myself, savoring flavors and textures, reminding myself that life was still worth tasting, even if it was alone. I started reading more, immersing myself in stories of resilience and hope, stories of women who had been knocked down and had risen again. Each page became a quiet affirmation. You are stronger than your circumstances. The pain shaped me in ways I couldn't have imagined. It forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, to face the rawness of loss, to wrestle with despair that sometimes felt insurmountable. I learned to sit with my sorrow without letting it consume me. I learned that strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength is quiet, measured, a determination to keep going when the world feels cold and unfeeling. 15 years of silence did not destroy me. It molded me into someone who could endure, someone who could survive betrayal and heartbreak without losing herself entirely. I found solace in small routines, tending to my garden at sunrise, walking through the quiet neighborhood with my dog by my side, writing letters to myself that I would never send, expressing the words that I could not speak to him. These rituals became my lifeline, tethering me to a sense of self-worth that I refused to let go of. I reminded myself daily that I was not defined by their rejection, that my love for my son, though unreciprocated, was not a weakness. It was a testament to the depth of my heart, the devotion of a mother who had given everything, and even as I endured these years of absence, I held on to the glimmer of hope that life could still change. Perhaps it was naive, perhaps it was stubborn, but I could not allow myself to believe that the story had ended. Every day I reminded myself that the silence was temporary, that one day I might find a way to reclaim my life, to find joy and fulfillment beyond their absence. The loneliness was a constant companion, but it also became a teacher. It taught me patience, resilience, and self-reliance. I learned to celebrate small victories on my own, to find meaning in my own accomplishments, even when no one else witnessed them. I learned that my identity was not solely tied to my role as a mother, that I could cultivate a sense of purpose and pride independent of their approval. Some nights I would sit by the window and imagine what my son's life had become, the house he lived in, the laughter he shared, the family moments he experienced without me. And though it hurt, I allowed myself to wish him well. I did not wish ill, because bitterness would have consumed me. Instead, I nurtured a quiet determination. If they could live their lives without me, then I would live mine fully, fiercely, and on my own terms. I began journaling, pouring my heart onto the pages, documenting every ache, every memory, every small spark of hope that kept me going. Reading back, I could see the transformation. The pain had shaped me, yes, but it had not broken me. The woman writing those pages was not a victim. She was a survivor, a mother whose heart had been tested beyond measure, and yet she remained intact. 15 years of silence taught me that grief is a journey, not a destination. Some days were easier than others, but every day added a layer of strength I did not know I possessed. I learned to treasure the quiet moments of reflection, to find beauty in solitude, to cultivate self-love in the absence of recognition from those I once held closest. And so, I endured. I endured the holidays alone, the birthdays without calls, the milestones missed. I endured the whispers of neighbors, the polite inquiries from friends, the hollow space at the table that no one else could fill. And through it all, I refused to surrender to despair. The pain shaped me, yes, but it did not destroy me. In those long, quiet years, a seed began to grow within me, a seed of hope, a seed of determination, a seed of revenge not born of cruelty, but of the simple truth that I would not be erased. One day they would see the woman I had become, the strength that had been forged in the fires of betrayal and silence. And when that day came, they would finally understand that the love they had tried to destroy could not be contained, could not be silenced, and would not be denied. This chapter focuses on loneliness, holidays, and milestones missed. Hiding pain from neighbors and friends. Nights crying in silence, developing inner strength and self-reliance, foreshadowing the eventual comeback and revenge. After 15 long years of silence, after the holidays spent alone, after the milestones I never shared with my son, I realized I had two choices: continue living in despair, letting the emptiness define me, or find a way to take control of my life. I was tired of being invisible. I was tired of waiting for them to notice me, to remember me, to acknowledge me. And so, slowly, quietly, I decided to build something just for myself. Something that could keep me busy, keep my mind engaged, and maybe, just maybe, remind me that I was capable of more than surviving pain. It started small. I had always enjoyed baking, the rhythm of measuring flour, the smell of sugar caramelizing in the oven, the warmth of something fresh coming out of the kitchen. So I decided to turn that passion into something more. I set up a tiny business from my own kitchen. I called it Sweet Comforts, a name that was as much about the pastries as it was about giving comfort to my own heart. At first, it was modest. I made a few cakes a week, some cookies, a handful of bread loaves. I sold them to neighbors, a few friends, and occasionally a local cafe that agreed to give me a chance. But let me tell you, it was not glamorous. My kitchen was always a mess, counters cluttered with mixing bowls, measuring cups, and flour dust floating like snow in the sunlight. I woke up before dawn to bake, long before anyone else in the neighborhood stirred. At night, I stayed late, cleaning, packaging, and dreaming of something bigger. Orders were small, sometimes just 1 or 2 a week. The money barely covered the ingredients, let alone anything else. I remember staring at the empty balance of my savings account more than once, wondering if I was foolish to keep pushing, to keep believing that this tiny endeavor could ever become anything. But I couldn't give up. Every cake I baked, every pastry I decorated, every customer who smiled when they tasted my treats reminded me that I was capable, that I was not defined by the absence of my family. I learned as I went along, reading books on business management, marketing, and customer service. I experimented with flavors, perfected recipes, and discovered ways to make my packaging more appealing. Slowly, I learned the rhythm of entrepreneurship, that it's about patience, persistence, and passion all rolled into one. There were countless setbacks. Orders would sometimes be late because the oven overheated, or ingredients would go bad faster than expected. Some clients would cancel, some would complain, and some would never return. I remember nights sitting at my kitchen table, hands covered in flour, tears slipping down my cheeks, wondering if the struggle was worth it. But even in those moments of doubt, I felt a spark inside me that refused to die. I reminded myself why I had started. Not for anyone else, not for recognition, but for me, for my independence, for my dignity. Then one day, after years of steady but modest effort, something finally clicked. A local food blogger stumbled upon my shop and featured one of my signature cakes online. Suddenly, orders began to pour in. Not just a handful, not just the occasional repeat customer. Orders came in steady, fast, and in numbers I had never imagined. People were calling, messaging, asking for special requests. The tiny kitchen that had once been a place of solitude and quiet despair became a hub of energy, filled with laughter, concentration, and the unmistakable hum of success. I'll never forget that first week when I realized my little venture had grown into something much bigger than I had dared to hope. I had employees helping me, ovens running nonstop, and a waiting list for my cakes that extended for weeks. The joy was indescribable. I remember walking into the shop that morning, sunlight spilling through the windows, the smell of fresh bread and pastries filling the air, and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Pure, unadulterated pride. I was standing on my own 2 feet. I was no longer the woman waiting in silence for her family to remember her. I was a business owner, a creator, a woman who had transformed pain into purpose. Every order I fulfilled, every satisfied customer, every compliment on my pastries became a reminder that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. The independence I felt was intoxicating. I no longer needed validation from my son or his wife. I no longer needed anyone to define my worth. I was proving it to myself day by day, cake by cake, success by success. And with every passing day, the business grew. What had started as a humble kitchen operation became something more substantial. I opened a small storefront, hired staff, and even started offering classes to share my passion with others. The financial freedom was liberating, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about control, about self-respect, about reclaiming my life from the years of neglect and pain. I began to see the possibilities ahead of me, possibilities I had never dared to imagine during those lonely, silent years. I could travel, invest in things I loved, and yes, even dream bigger dreams. Dreams that involved living life on my own terms, not dictated by those who had once cast me aside. What made the experience even sweeter, literally and figuratively, was the realization that every success, every milestone, was mine, and mine alone. I had built this empire from scratch, without anyone's help, without anyone to guide me or cheer me on. The pain and betrayal I had endured had forged a determination and resilience that now fueled my every move. Each order that came in, each smile from a customer, each compliment on my work was a quiet affirmation. I am capable. I am strong. I am enough. As my business flourished, so did my confidence. I walked taller, spoke louder, and carried myself with a dignity I had once thought was lost forever. I realized that the years of silence, the loneliness, and the heartbreak had not destroyed me. They had prepared me. They had forced me to cultivate inner strength, patience, and a relentless determination that now allowed me to thrive. And I began to imagine what the future could hold. A future where I was not dependent on anyone, where I could make choices freely, where I could live life fully and unapologetically. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about success or financial independence. This was about reclaiming my life from the shadows of betrayal. This was about proving to myself, and perhaps one day to those who had doubted me, that I could rise, even when cast aside. Every cake I baked, every satisfied customer, every growing order became a testament to my perseverance, a quiet rebellion against the years of neglect and absence. It was in those quiet, long hours of kneading dough and decorating pastries that I realized the true power of resilience. I had turned my heartbreak into action, my despair into creativity, and my loneliness into productivity. And as the orders multiplied and my little business grew into a thriving operation, I felt a sense of freedom I had never known. I was no longer waiting for someone else to validate me. I was validating myself every single day, with my own hands, my own effort, and my own determination. And so, standing in my shop, surrounded by the warmth of the ovens and the hum of success, I finally felt a joy I hadn't known in years, the joy of independence. I had built something that was mine, something that nobody could take away, something that had grown out of the ashes of betrayal, something that reminded me that I was stronger than anyone had ever given me credit for. This small business had not just saved me financially. It had saved my spirit. It had restored my confidence, my sense of purpose, and my ability to dream again. And as I looked forward to the future, I knew that this was only the beginning, the first step in reclaiming everything I had been denied for so long. This chapter emphasizes starting a small business to survive and keep busy, early struggles and setbacks, learning, persistence, and growth. The moment success finally arrives and the joy of independence, reclaiming self-worth and empowerment through work. After years of hard work, long nights, and endless dedication to my small business, something had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The tiny shop I had started in my kitchen had grown into a thriving enterprise, and with it came financial freedom. A freedom I had only ever dreamed of during those long, lonely years. For the first time in a very long time, I could make choices without anyone's approval, without anyone's interference. I could finally live life on my own terms, and I decided it was time to dream bigger than I ever had before. I had always imagined what my dream home would be like, especially during those 15 years of silence and isolation. I pictured a house filled with light, where sunlight poured through grand windows and reflected off polished floors. I imagined spaces filled with warmth and laughter, spaces where friends could gather without awkward silences, spaces where I could feel the comfort of living fully, freely, and peacefully. I dreamed of a home that would be a sanctuary, not just a house, but a statement of the life I had built from scratch. It wasn't easy finding the right place. I walked through countless properties, some beautiful but lacking soul, others grand but cold. I toured homes with overpriced chandeliers and sterile empty rooms. None of them felt right. I wanted a place that spoke to me, that reflected the journey I had been on, that celebrated the victories I had earned through blood, sweat, and tears. And then, one day, I found it. It was a mansion nestled in a quiet neighborhood, far enough from the city to feel private, yet close enough to everything I needed. The exterior was elegant, with soft stone walls, tall arched windows, and a sprawling garden that promised endless possibilities. As I stepped through the front gate, I could feel my heartbeat quicken. This wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for, a monument to my perseverance and resilience. Walking through the front doors for the first time, I felt a rush of emotion I hadn't experienced in years. The foyer was expansive, with marble floors that reflected the afternoon light streaming in from the high windows. A grand staircase curved gracefully to the upper floors, and the scent of polished wood filled the air. I ran my fingers along the banister, feeling the smoothness beneath my touch, and thought, I built this. I earned this. This is mine. Each room I explored brought a new wave of awe and pride. The living room was vast and open, with sunlight pouring in, creating golden patterns on the hardwood floors. I could imagine friends gathered here, laughter echoing off the walls, music filling the space on weekends and holidays. The kitchen was a dream. State-of-the-art appliances, wide counters, and enough space for me to cook without ever feeling cramped. I could almost smell the aromas of fresh bread and simmering sauces, hear the clatter of pans and the hum of conversation. The bedrooms were spacious, each with its own personality. I ran my hand across the walls, imagining the nights I would spend here, finally free to rest without the ghosts of my past hovering over me. The bathrooms were elegant, with marble counters and deep tubs that promised relaxation after long days. And then there was the library, a room I had always longed for, filled with shelves ready to hold books I had collected over years, stories that had comforted me, inspired me, and reminded me that life could still be beautiful even after heartbreak. As I walked through the halls, exploring every corner of this magnificent home, I realized something profound. I had done this. Every brick, every polished floor, every window through which the sunlight streamed, it was all a result of my own efforts. I hadn't inherited it, I hadn't been gifted it, and I hadn't relied on anyone else. I had built this life for myself, step by step, with nothing but determination, resilience, and hard work. The thought filled me with a sense of accomplishment that was almost overwhelming. For the first time in years, I felt proud, strong, and free. I had taken control of my life in a way that no one could ever take away. The mansion wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol, a tangible representation of my journey from isolation and betrayal to empowerment and independence. I could walk through these halls and remind myself of everything I had overcome, everything I had endured, and everything I had achieved on my own terms. I began to imagine the life I would create here. Mornings spent on the balcony with a cup of coffee, sunlight bathing my face as I watched the world wake up. Afternoons in the garden, tending to flowers and vegetables, feeling connected to something living and growing, much like I had grown through the years of struggle. Evenings spent hosting friends, sharing meals, laughter, and stories, filling the spaces with warmth and joy that had once been missing from my life. This mansion, in all its grandeur, was also a reminder that I no longer needed validation from those who had abandoned me. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy or complete. I didn't need my son or his wife to recognize my achievements. The house, the success, the independence, it was proof enough of my strength and resilience. I could live fully, unapologetically, without relying on anyone else to define my value. And yet, as I stood in the grand hallways, exploring each room, I felt a flicker of anticipation. There was a part of me that wondered how the people who had cast me aside would react when they saw this new life I had built. Would they recognize the woman I had become? Would they see the power and independence that had grown from the ashes of 15 years of silence? I didn't yet know what I would do if they showed up, but I felt a quiet, unshakable confidence that I could handle it. I had earned every inch of this life, and I would protect it with the strength I had cultivated over years of perseverance. As the sun set that evening, casting golden light through the expansive windows, I stood in the living room and took a deep breath. This was my sanctuary, my home, my life. And for the first time in over a decade, I felt truly whole. Every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of doubt and loneliness had led me here. I had created something beautiful from the pain. And nothing, not betrayal, not abandonment, not heartbreak, could take it away from me. I spent that first night walking from room to room, imagining the life I would live within these walls. I imagined laughter echoing through the halls, friends visiting, quiet mornings reading in the sun-drenched library, and evenings spent in the kitchen perfecting new recipes. Each step reinforced the reality that I was no longer the woman who had been silenced and abandoned. I was someone who had reclaimed her life, someone who had taken control and transformed it into a testament of strength and independence. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I made a promise to myself. I would never forget where I came from, the pain I had endured, or the lessons I had learned. But I would also never allow anyone to diminish me again. This mansion was more than a home. It was proof that I could rise from betrayal, rebuild myself, and thrive in ways I had never imagined. For the first time in years, I truly felt free, proud, and powerful. A woman who had taken the long road from heartbreak to triumph and who was ready for whatever the next chapter of life would bring. This chapter emphasizes financial freedom leading to dreams of a mansion. The joy of discovering and buying a stunning home. Walking through the mansion for the first time, reflecting on her achievements, a sense of pride, strength, and freedom. Foreshadowing potential confrontations or reactions from family in the next chapter. I had barely had time to savor the joy of my new mansion when the unthinkable happened. It was the very next day after I had settled into my home, arranging furniture, hanging pictures, and finally breathing in the life I had worked so hard to build. I was standing in the kitchen, my morning coffee warming my hands, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, when I heard a knock at the front door. At first, I didn't recognize the sound. It was so ordinary, so mundane that my heart barely registered it. But then I saw them. My son and his wife standing on the porch with smiles plastered across their faces. The same smiles they had worn during family photos 15 years ago. Smiles that once meant love and now carried the faintest whiff of entitlement. They looked at me like nothing had ever happened. Like the years of silence, the birthdays missed, the holidays gone, were mere inconveniences easily forgotten. I opened the door, my hand still wrapped around my coffee mug, trying to steady my heartbeat. They greeted me cheerfully, as if our 15 years of estrangement were simply a pause button they had pressed and now released. My son, once my only source of comfort and love, now a stranger molded by her influence, looked at me with a smile that felt rehearsed, practiced. And she stood slightly behind him, radiating confidence, the same confidence that had kept us apart for so many years. Then they said it. The words that made my stomach twist and my heart pound in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Hey, Mom, we're moving in since you have all this extra room." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind raced through 1,000 emotions all at once. Disbelief, shock, anger, sadness, even a twinge of disbelief that this could really be happening. 15 years of silence, 15 years of estrangement, 15 years of rebuilding my life without them. And suddenly, they were back, casually assuming that my home, my sanctuary, was theirs to invade. Anger surged first, hot and immediate, making my hands tremble slightly. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers for the years they had stolen from me, to ask how they could so casually step into my life as if nothing had ever happened. Sadness followed closely behind, a deep ache that reminded me of every birthday, every holiday, every lonely night when I had cried silently into my pillow, wishing for just a glimpse of the family I had lost. Disbelief lingered like a fog, refusing to lift. Could this really be happening? Could they really think they could just step back into my life and claim my generosity as their right? But then I remembered something crucial, something I had learned over the years of struggle and rebuilding. I had survived their betrayal. I had built a life on my own, a life filled with independence, joy, and power. And for the first time in 15 years, the power was in my hands. The anger, the sadness, the disbelief. I could feel them, yes, but I would not let them dictate my actions. I would not give them the satisfaction of breaking me again. I smiled. Not a polite, nervous smile, not a tentative smile. A smile that carried years of strength, resilience, and quiet triumph. A smile that said, "I am no longer the woman you tried to erase." They looked at me, confused, expecting perhaps relief, submission, or gratitude. But I was calm, composed, and ready. I welcomed them into my home, but only in a way that would make them realize just how much had changed. Their assumptions, their sense of entitlement, would meet the reality of my strength and independence. I looked them in the eyes, my gaze steady, and I said simply, "You're welcome to visit, but living here, that's not going to happen." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. My son's smile faltered, his confident posture wavering. He opened his mouth to protest, to argue, to insist, but I held my ground. I could see the disbelief in his eyes. He had never imagined that I would have the courage, the power, and the will to say no. And she looked stunned, as if the careful control she had exercised for so many years had suddenly evaporated in the face of my calm authority. The power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, I was in control. Every decision, every boundary, every word I spoke was mine to dictate. They had spent 15 years shaping a life without me, believing they held all the cards. But now, the game had changed. I had built my life on my own terms, and they were not welcome to rewrite it. I could feel a strange mixture of satisfaction and quiet vindication. I didn't need to yell or scream to make them understand. My confidence, my calm demeanor, and my unwavering gaze conveyed far more than words ever could. They were shocked, and that shock was a reminder of just how far I had come. The woman they had tried to control, to isolate, to diminish, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and unshakable. I invited them in for coffee, keeping my tone polite, cordial, almost deceptively casual. But every word, every gesture was intentional. I let them see my home, not to impress them, but to assert ownership. Every room, every piece of furniture, every corner of this mansion was a testament to the life I had built without them. I could see the subtle realization dawning in their expressions, that I had not only survived, but I had thrived. That the woman they had tried to erase had become someone they could no longer control or intimidate. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Revenge is not always about retaliation or cruelty. Sometimes it is simply about reclaiming your life, asserting your boundaries, and standing strong in the face of those who once sought to diminish you. My power was not in forcing them out, but in living fully, unapologetically, and on my own terms. They had assumed that my home, my life, my success was theirs to take, and I proved them wrong simply by being who I had become. I watched their expressions carefully, noting the subtle shifts, the widening eyes, the slight stiffening of posture, the hesitation in their voices. They had come expecting ease, expecting to slip back into my life, expecting that the years of silence and estrangement had left me weak or desperate. But I was neither. I was whole, complete, and fully aware of my worth. When they finally spoke again, trying to negotiate, trying to charm, trying to persuade, I remained calm. My smile never wavered. My voice was steady. Every word I spoke reinforced the truth they had refused to acknowledge for so long. I am independent. I am strong. I am in control, and you will not dictate my life again. The shock on their faces was almost palpable. They had underestimated me for 15 years, assuming that time alone would break me, that silence would weaken me, that absence would erase my presence. But it had done the opposite. It had strengthened me. It had clarified my boundaries. It had given me the clarity and courage to say no, to protect my home, my peace, and my life. For the first time, I felt something I had not felt in years. Empowerment. The storm of emotions that had raged inside me, anger, sadness, disbelief, had settled into a calm, unshakable certainty. I knew who I was, what I deserved, and that I had earned the right to live without intrusion from those who had once abandoned me. And so, standing in the foyer of my mansion, looking at the two people who had caused me so much pain, I felt the full weight of my triumph. The power was finally in my hands. 15 years of silence, 15 years of rebuilding, and 15 years of pain had led me to this moment. I had survived. I had thrived. And I had reclaimed my life in a way that no one could take away. They had returned expecting control, expecting submission, expecting familiarity. Instead, they were met with independence, strength, and the calm authority of someone who had rebuilt everything they had tried to steal. And in that silence, in that shared gaze, they finally understood. I was no longer the person they thought I was. I was stronger, wiser, and fully in command of my life. This chapter emphasizes the shocking return of the son and daughter-in-law, their entitlement and presumption. The storm of emotions inside the narrator calm, measured response with surprising power, shift of control and empowerment after years of betrayal. As I sit here in my mansion, sunlight spilling through the windows, I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought me to this moment. From the pain of betrayal, the years of silence, the heartbreak of being cut off from my own son, to the long nights of solitude, I have walked a path that was both painful and transformative. Every tear, every lonely holiday, every struggle I faced became a stepping stone toward the life I now live, a life I built with my own two hands. The lesson I've learned is simple, yet powerful. Never let others decide your worth. Never allow betrayal, rejection, or cruelty to define who you are. The people who tried to diminish me, who tried to erase me from their lives, could not stop me from finding my strength. They could not stop me from thriving, from reclaiming my life, and from standing proudly in my own power. And here's the truth about revenge. It doesn't always roar. It doesn't always need to be dramatic or destructive. Sometimes the most profound revenge is quiet. It's building a life so full, so joyful, and so independent that those who tried to break you can only watch in disbelief. Sometimes revenge is simply living better without them. So, to anyone watching who has been betrayed, abandoned, or underestimated, your power is within you. Build your life, cultivate your strength, and let your success speak for itself. In the end, living fully, proudly, and unapologetically is the ultimate victory, and no one can ever take that away from you.